dimensions to them. Some of the pyramid's immense stone blocks, for example, are stacked vertically rather than staggered in the usual pattern. And in certain parts of the pyramid, curious rough-hewn stones crop up in the midst of polished limestone. Like generations of pyramid visitors before them, the two Frenchmen, Gilles Dormion and Jean-Patrice Gaudin, were captivated by the great monument, and like so many others, they believed that they could penetrate its mysteries. The structural anomalies the architects deduced were clues to hidden, previously unknown rooms within the pyramid. They speculated that one such secret chamber might even contain the remains of the pharaoh Cheops himself, thus resolving one of the pyramid's eternal questions: where is the body it was presumably built to entomb? Dormion and Gaudin had considerable technological advantages over previous pyramid detectives. After several exploratory visits to the stone hallways, they returned in August of 1986 with a microgravimeter, a sophisticated instrument capable of registering density voids or cavities within the pyramid. And behind the walls of a corridor leading to the room known as the Queen's Chamber, the device detected the voids predicted by the architects. Encouraged, the two men got permission from Egyptian authorities to drill into the ancient limestone walls in search of the pyramid's secrets. For days, the architects and their colleagues worked in the cramped passages of the pyramid, their drills chewing through more than 2 yards of rock in 3 different places, but all they uncovered were pockets of fine crystalline sand. The microgravimeter, it seemed, could indicate the presence of voids in the pyramid, but could not pinpoint their precise location. The secret chambers, if they exist, remained hidden. The Great Pyramid had thwarted yet another attempt in the long, frustrating and fascinating quest to unravel its abiding riddles. Since the time of the classical Greeks, people have gazed at this sole survivor of the ancient world's 7 wonders and asked questions they could not answer. Why was it built? If it was a tomb, as conventional wisdom has generally supposed, why were no symbols or possessions of royalty, much less a royal corpse, ever found? If it was not a tomb, what was it? And how was it built? How, given the building techniques of the day, could one explain the astonishing precision of its construction, its near-perfect alignment to the points of the compass, the exquisite accuracy of its masonry? If the pyramid's design incorporates advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge, as many investigators believe, how did its builders acquire such wisdom so far in advance of other civilizations? Could the enigmatic structure even harbour some sort of mystical powers beyond the realm of conventional science? More than a few archaeologists, astronomers, religious scholars and amateur pyramid enthusiasts have argued such questions through the centuries. While archaeologists focus on the structure purely as a historical artifact, other investigators have usually fallen into 3 schools of thought. The first, and most common, holds that the pyramid represents a universal system of measurement, that its very dimensions embody archetypal measures of length and even time. A splinter group of 19th century pyramid students suggest its immensity. A ground area of 13.1 acres, the edifice itself composed of some 2.3 million limestone blocks, averaging 2.5 tons each. The structure contains enough stone to build a wall of foot square cubes, 2/3 of the way around the globe at the equator, a distance of 16,600 miles. The Great Pyramid and the two others that stand near it on the plateau, attributed to Cheops' immediate successors, were erected during the period of Egyptian history known as the Fourth Dynasty. Between 2613 and 2494 BC, Egyptologists believe that Cheops, as the Greeks knew him, his Egyptian name was Khufu, ordered the immense building raised as a tomb and monument to himself. Its outer shell was originally composed of highly polished limestone blocks, fitted together with painstaking precision, but these casing stones were stripped off in the 14th century and used in the construction of Cairo. At some point in history, the original capstone, forming the top 31 feet of the pyramid, was also removed. Egyptologists have drawn on their knowledge of Egyptian religion to explain the significance of the pyramid shape, contending that it could have been connected with sun worship. The angled walls, they say, resemble the outspread rays of the sun descending earthward from a cloud, and the pyramid thus represents a stairway to the heavens. Some students of the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, such as the modern occultist writer Manly B. Hall, even maintain that the pyramid provided more than merely figurative passage to celestial realms. According to Hall, the building was a secret temple where the elect underwent a mystic ritual transforming them into gods. The initiates would lie for 3 days and nights within the pyramid while their Ka, the solar essence, left their bodies and entered the spiritual spheres of space. In the process, the candidates achieved actual immortality and became godlike. More down-to-earth questions surround the issue of how, in an age without pulleys or the wheel, the massive pyramid was built, but archaeologists have guessed at a general scenario. The builders somehow levelled the site and then aligned the sides of the building by making repeated observations of circumpolar stars to determine true directions. At quarries a few miles away, masons cut the limestone. With stone hammers and copper chisels, crews consisting of hundreds of workers then drag the blocks to the site. Granite used in some parts of the interior was ferried down the Nile from a site about 400 miles distant and hauled up a causeway from the river. To pull the multiton blocks up the sides of the rising pyramid, they may have used a spiralling earthen ramp, although some experts believe they levered the stone upward on planks and wooden runners. The blocks were then fitted together with hairline precision, displaying an accuracy of engineering that impresses even present-day builders. Many observers have doubted that so massive a structure as the Great Pyramid, a miracle of engineering, a prodigy of decades of back-breaking labour under the blazing sun, could have been intended merely for the housing of one royal mummy. Alternate explanations historian Herodotus was the first visitor to gather and record information about the Great Pyramid in a systematic way. Herodotus visited Giza in the 5th century AC, when the structure was already 2,000 years old, and wrote a description of its construction based on his conversations with local Egyptians. Unable to go inside the edifice, its entrance was hidden. He accepted his informant's claim that the pyramid was a tomb built to the tyrannical Khufu. The king's burial vault, they said, lay underground. 100,000 men laboured on the pyramid, according to Herodotus, with fresh crews thrown onto the project every 3 months. They built the causeway from the river to the plateau in 10 years. The pyramid itself took another 20 years to complete. Engineers lifted the gigantic stones off the sides of the structure step by step, using machines formed of short wooden planks on each step. Herodotus did not elaborate on how these machines worked. He was also told that outer casing stones were installed from the top down after the interior core was in place. These glistening, highly polished stones were covered with inscriptions, later lost when the blocks were carted off to Cairo. Herodotus was interested in the Great Pyramid primarily as an engineering project, but the next pyramid explorer known to history had a somewhat different perspective on the structure and introduced what was to become an abiding theme of pyramid studies, the quest for the mathematical wisdom possessed by the ancients. The 9th century Arab caliph Abdullah al-Mamun was a young ruler with a scientific turn of mind and a special interest in astronomy. He dreamed of mapping the world and charting the heavens, and he turned his attention to the pyramid when he learned that its secret chambers reportedly contained highly accurate maps and tables executed by the pyramid builders. In addition, and perhaps of more interest to the caliph's fellow explorers, great treasure was said to be hidden somewhere within. Arab historians later told the dramatic tale of how the caliph and his team of architects, builders and stonemasons set to work in AD 820. Unable to find an entrance to the inscrutable structure, they launched a frontal attack, heating the limestone blocks with fire and then dousing them with cold vinegar till they cracked. After burrowing through 100 feet of rock this way, the explorers finally reached a narrow, 4-foot-high passageway that climbed steeply upward. At its upper end, they found the pyramid's original entrance, 49 feet above the ground, blocked and hidden by a pivoting stone door. Turning around, the explorers followed the passageway downward. After crawling on their hands and knees through the inky darkness, they were chagrined to find only an unfinished empty chamber. If secret writings or a king's ransom were to be found in the pyramid, it would be elsewhere. Excitement was rekindled, however, when Al-Mamun's men returned to the passageway and discovered what looked like another corridor, sloping upward. Unfortunately, its entrance was completely filled by a large granite plug, obviously placed there deliberately. The granite was impervious to their hammers and chisels, but the determined Arabs found that they could chip through the softer limestone blocks around it. As soon as they did, though, they found another granite obstacle, and then several more. Someone had been determined to bar intruders from the pyramid's inner sanctum. After laboriously hacking their way sarcophagus was empty. In a frenzy of disappointment, the Arabs ripped up part of the floor and hacked at the walls, hoping to find some trace of treasure. Al-Mamun could only conclude that either the empty sarcophagus was all that was ever there, or that looters had long ago pillaged the room. But if earlier marauders had indeed made their way to the chamber, a basic question remained unanswered. How did they get by the stone plugs that had stymied the caliph and his men? So, this illustration here shows the early explorers probing the Great Pyramid as they clamber into the limestone Grand Gallery. "800 years passed before the next stride in pursuit of pyramid learning. During this time, Europe had emerged from the Dark Ages into a luminous era of expansion and exploration. Adventurers, merchants, and statesmen alike were hampered, however, by their ignorance of world geography and by the lack of a single internationally accepted unit of weight, length, and geographical degree. In response, scholars turned, as they so often did, to the ancients, hoping to find some forgotten fundamental unit of measure based on precise knowledge of the Earth's dimensions. In search of this knowledge, British mathematician John Greaves visited Egypt in 1638. The bookish 36-year-old had spent most of his life within the confines of academia, first at Oxford and then as a professor of geometry at Gresham. College in London. But books, Greaves found, were no substitute for experience. He travelled first to Italy, where he measured Roman monuments to find the legendary Roman foot, a fraction of an inch shorter than the British foot, he concluded, and then to Giza. Let's just go back for a second and have a look at this illustration. So, it's a painting. It says, "The eternal allure of the pyramids is evident in this 19th century painting of dawn on the Giza Plateau. The largest structure is the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Its neighbours are monuments to that pharaoh's successors." So here it is. Greaves believed, as had the 19th century Arab caliph Al-Mamun before him, that the pyramid builders had possessed a geometrical wisdom, now lost to the world. Hoping to discover the unit of measurement they had employed, Greaves mounted the 38-foot-high pile of debris around the pyramid's base, instruments on hand, and clambered through Al-Mamun's makeshift entrance. The first thing he encountered was a blizzard of bats. These he dispersed by firing his pistol. He then scrambled around the granite blocks as the Arabs had done, meticulously measured the king's chamber and the sarcophagus, 6.488 feet long, which suggested to Greaves that human dimensions had not changed, and marvelled at the precise masonry. His main find, however, was a narrow well, which plunged straight down into darkness from the bottom of the Grand Gallery. Was it an escape route for the builders after they lodged the stone plugs in place? A gateway passage for looters? Greaves never found out. The bats and foul air forced him to give up a reconnaissance devised John Greaves more than a century and a half before. Principal among the pyramid students was a young scientist named Edme Francois Jamard, who had studied the slender archive of pyramid literature, much of it unreliable, that had accumulated over the centuries. Like Greaves, he was especially eager to establish the unit of measurement that the builders used and to discover whether those measures were derived from the dimensions of the earth, as was the metric system recently adopted by revolutionary France. The metre was then defined as 1 in 10 million of the quadrant of the Earth's circumference from the North Pole to the equator. Jonard and his colleagues quickly abandoned their attempt to investigate the pyramid's interior when they encountered the formidable mounds of guano deposited by the resident bats, shown here. The indignant animals, a chastened French colonel reported, scratched with their claws and stifled with the acrid stench of their bodies. Driven back, the savants turned to the structure's exterior. Aided by a workforce of 150 Turks, they cleared tons of sand and debris from the northwest and northeast corners and discovered 2 rectangular depressions. In the base rock where the original cornerstones, carried off centuries earlier, had rested. This gave them 2 good anchors for a measurement of the pyramid's base, although their work was still hampered by piles of debris along the north wall. First, Jonard measured one side of the base, 230.9 metres, or 775.5 feet. Then he struggled along to the 33-square-foot platform at the summit of the truncated edifice, tried unsuccessfully to slingshot a stone beyond the base, and patiently measured the height of each stone step on his descent. Total elevation 146.6 metres, or 481 feet. With these figures, Jonard calculated the angle of the slope of the pyramid as 51 degrees, 19 minutes, and its apothegm, the line from the apex to the midpoint of each of its 4 sides at the bottom, was measured as 184.7 metres, or 606 feet. The young scientist knew that early writers had described the pyramid's apothegm as 1 stadium long. He also remembered that the length of a stadium, a basic unit of measurement in the ancient world, was believed to be related to the circumference of the earth. His figure for the apothegm was thus a number to conjure with. Jonard turned his attention next to the cubit, another ancient measure of length. Herodotus had written that a stadium contained 400 cubits, so the Frenchman divided his figure for the apothegm by 400, which gave him a cubit measure of 4,618 metres. Other Greek authorities on the subject had declared the base of the Great Pyramid to be 500 cubits long. When Jonard multiplied his .4618 by 500, the result was 230.9 metres, exactly what he had totalled up for the base length. To Jonard, the message was clear. The Egyptians had an advanced knowledge of geometry. They knew the size of the earth. They derived their units of measure from the earth's circumference, and they built this knowledge into the Great Pyramid. The evidence was in the stones. Unfortunately for Jonard, measurements made with inexact instruments amid the migrating sands of the desert could be tantalizingly inexact. The task of pyramid measuring was greatly complicated Memphis, Tennessee took its name from an older river city in Egypt. In 1880, New Yorkers imported an obelisk called Cleopatra's Needle and installed it in Central Park. Pyramid themes became fashionable just as society, particularly the society of Victorian England, was entering a troubling time, an era in which modern science seemed to threaten traditional religious beliefs. In response, some religiously orientated scholars seized upon the mysterious structures as proof of the divine's hand present in the world. The first major proponent of this theory was a London editor and critic named John Taylor. Taylor was a widely educated and deeply religious man. He was as well versed in the scriptures as he was in mathematics, astronomy and literature. After starting out as an apprentice to a bookseller, Taylor had risen by the 1820s to the post of editor of London Magazine. His distinguished circle of acquaintances included poets John Clare and John Keats. Nevertheless, he frightened away half his friends, according to one of them, with what was to become a 30-year-long obsession with the mystery of the Great Pyramid. So let's go back a little bit and take a look at this page, The Voice of the Sphinx. And here it is, and here is a man leaning in to the Sphinx's lips. Towering 60 feet above the swirling sands of the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx has for millennia proved fascinating, as it is majestic. For many, the impassive face and knowing smile have come to embody the lost wisdom of the ancient world. This most inscrutable of structures appears to have been built of stone from the depleted quarry already used for the Giza pyramids. In about 2700 BC, stone workers cut out the best and hardest rock for the Great Pyramid and its neighbours, shunning the softer bedrock. Masons then transformed these leavings into the Great Sphinx, sculpting its massive head with an idealised likeness of Pharaoh Khephren, complete with royal headdress. Through the centuries, sandstorms have threatened to engulf the Sphinx, giving rise to one of its most enduring stories. Around 1400 BC, when the Sphinx was buried up to its neck, a prince on a hunt stopped to rest in the shadow of the figure's head and soon fell asleep. In a dream, he heard the voice of the Sphinx promise to make him ruler of Egypt ahead of his older brothers if he would clear away the sand. On awakening, the prince vowed to keep his part of the bargain. He completed the task shortly after ascending to the throne as Pharaoh Thutmose IV. So I'm just also going to read this little section here. An occultist's honeymoon. A number of overnight visitors to the Great Pyramid have reported odd happenings within its walls, but the strangest experience by far was related by Aleister Crowley. Here he is, self-styled Great Beast of the Occult World. Crowley was an Englishman who had founded a secret society devoted to what he called sexual magic. He visited the pyramid on his honeymoon